Great. Well, there's still a few in the drinks line, but we'll get underway. So I want to welcome you to the Library Company of Philadelphia's annual Juneteenth program. I wish I was welcoming you to 1314 Locust Street, which is the headquarters of the Library Company. But we've been having some HVAC issues in the weather, you can imagine. And also the turnout this evening actually exceeds the capacity of our meeting room. So we're very pleased to be able to be here at the Science History Institute. We're grateful to our colleagues here for accommodating us at almost the last minute. David Cole, the president and CEO, and Sarah Devini, the conference center manager. So thank you to them. And our staff, Fran Dolan and Grace Harrington, have done a great job of, at the last minute, working out the logistics of the change of venue. So we're grateful to them too. Fran would be here, except our HVAC problems just turned more serious, and we have a partial power outage at the Library Company, which is definitely not a good thing. And Fran is up at the building monitoring the situation. Most of you probably know that the Library Company was founded by Benjamin Franklin. It's a research library with extraordinary collections of rare books, manuscripts, prints, photographs, graphic works, art and artifacts that really shed light on almost all aspects of American history from the 17th to the 19th centuries. And among the strongest holdings, among those hundreds of thousands of books, is our collection of African American history. It's 13,000 printed works and graphics printed pretty much before 1900, one of the largest in the country. And all of those materials have now been fully digitized and are accessible online. It's a remarkable resource. Because of that, a pretty large proportion of our research fellows and other researchers use the African American history collection. And we've actually been focusing on this for a very long time, well before many other institutions discovered the field. Our first exhibition was in 1969, curated by my predecessor, Edwin Wolfe. And two of his daughters are here today, so I welcome them. And our Juneteenth programming goes back to 2007, which is the year we established our program in African American history. So this marks the 18th occasion of our Juneteenth program. So present this evening are 10 undergraduates who are participating in our Mellon Scholars program, which we conduct every June and have been for a number of years. So we're pleased to have them with us. And besides the Mellon Foundation, which funds that program, we're very grateful to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the law firm of Archer and Greiner, PC, for funding this evening's event. Krista Papasil from the MacArthur Foundation is with us this evening as well, so I welcome Krista. You're all familiar with John F. Kennedy's famous 1962 quip that he made at a dinner at the White House for Nobel laureates, which he described as the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. This evening, Jim Downs, who's the director of our program in African American history, has brought together another such constellation. This time, 3 scholars who last year all received grants from the MacArthur Foundation. Jim is the Gilder Lehrman National Endowment for the Humanities Professor of Civil War Era Studies and History at Gettysburg College, and the author of books and articles way too numerous to mention, and himself the recipient of a Guggenheim Foundation fellowship recently. So I'm going to introduce Jim Downs now, who will introduce our panel and lead this evening's discussion.
Good evening and welcome to our Juneteenth program. I'm totally thrilled to be here to introduce our speakers. But before I do that, I want to say something about the program on African American history, which was started by Professor Erica Armstrong Dunbar, who had a vision to bring academic research in conversation with public humanities. She was then succeeded by Dr. Deirdre Cooper Owens, and both of them have created the space to not only continue the work of the Mellon Foundation, but also to insist upon the significance of Black history in the 18th and 19th century. We would not be able to do the program in Black history here at the Library Company of Philadelphia if it were not for the brilliant work of our trustees. And I just would ask for each of them to please stand up, because they have been an important liaison for the PAH program and the board and my support during this time. So first, Nefertiti Strickland, who is here. Thank you very much. Michelle Flamer, Carla Peterson, among others. So thank you very much for the members and Lucas, et cetera, for their work. As John mentioned, tonight's program coincides with the Mellon program that provides undergraduate students and early graduate students with access to learn about the collections here at the Library Company of Philadelphia, but also to serve as a pipeline for graduate programs. This was, again, the product of Erica Armstrong Dunbar's vision of what LCP could be. And to that end, I just want to acknowledge the students here. So I'm going to say each of their names. There's only 10 for them to stand up, so you know who they are. They have a profound sense of interest and endless curiosity in the study of the past, and it's been really an honor and a privilege to work with them. Gwendolyn Dickey from Sewanee University. Faith Page from the College of William and Mary. Tristan White from the University of Texas at San Antonio. Ariana Baptiste from the University of Pennsylvania. Sophie Burnett from the University of Alabama. Veronica Prim from the University of Kentucky. Trinity Stewart from the University of Connecticut. And Jevin Watkins from SUNY Buffalo. I'm going to make sure I got everyone. Also, Tamar Sari is our senior fellow back here from Temple University, who is serving as the liaison and has been really wonderful. Okay, so when I was thinking about the Juneteenth program this year, and I don't know, is Dr. Brianna Moore here? I don't see her, but also Dr. Moore is our senior fellow as well. When I was thinking about the Juneteenth program for this year and to actually think about something that would connect the academic world to the broader community, it was just at the time when the MacArthur grants were announced, and 3 of the recipients are sort of amazing heroes and of mine who have actually transformed the fields of Black studies, and each in their own right is a path-breaking scholar. When I sat down to write the introduction, I realized I could spend literally an hour going through each one of their contributions. And I say that not to be sycophantic and even hyperbolic in any way. It's truly that they have each in their own right transformed the field. And they've, most of all, as we can see here tonight, they've inspired generations of scholars to continue to do important work. So I'm going to limit my comments, the introductory remarks, briefly, because I'm not able to capture all that they've done, but just to orient you a little bit with their scholarship, and then of course the conversation that will unfold will provide you more insight. First, we have Professor Ruha Benjamin, who is the Alexander Stewart 1886 Professor of African American Studies at Princeton, where she specializes in the interdisciplinary study of science, medicine, and technology, with a focus on the relationship between innovation and social inequity. She is the author of 4 books, including People Science, Bodies and Rights on the Stem Cell Frontier, which was published by Stanford. She was also the author of Viral Justice, How We Grow and the World We Want, which was published by Princeton and was the winner of the 2023 Stowe Prize. She's also the author of Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Crow Code. A reviewer in The Nation describes her book as, "What's ultimately distinctive about Race After Technology is that its withering critiques of the present are so galvanizing. The field Benjamin maps is treacherous and phantasmatic, full of obstacles and tripwires, whose strength lies in their indivisibility. But each time she pries open a black box, linking the present to some horrific past, the future feels more open-ended, more immutable. Her most recent book, Imagination, a Manifesto, which was published by Norton in 2024, according to Publishers Weekly, Benjamin cautions that society is in danger of being ensnarled by the quasi-utopias on offer from tech titans, where the well-off escape problems rather than solve them, and technology is used to police and surveil regular people. She is the editor of Captivating Technology. She received her BA in Sociology and Anthropology from Spelman and her PhD in Sociology from Berkeley, and completed postdoctoral training at UCLA and Harvard, and has won many awards, including an award for distinguished teaching. Jennifer L. Morgan is the Silver Professor and Professor of Social and Cultural Critical Analysis at NYU. She is the author of Reckoning with Slavery, Gender, Kinship, and Capitalism in the Early Black Atlantic, which won the Mary Nicholas Prize in Women's History and/or Gender History from the OAH, and the Frederick Douglass Prize by the Gilder Lehrman Center. As historian Seth Rockman, who is a friend of LCP, notes in his review of Morgan's book in Labor History, quote, consistent with an archival turn within the field of slavery studies, Reckoning with Slavery contemplates the possibilities for excavating a social history of enslaved women from sources that were designed to erase them. Morgan is also the author of Laboring Women, Gender and Reproduction in the Making of New World Slavery. As a reviewer in the Journal of American History notes, quote, Morgan must rely on sources created by white men, travel accounts, ship records, official government documents, especially probate records and court cases, which she mines meticulously for nuggets of information. Morgan is to be commended for her imaginative use of sources. She is also the co-editor of Connections, which she edited with Jennifer Breyer and me. It's my main claim to fame here tonight. Her recent journal articles include Partus Sequitur Ventrium, Law, Race, and Reproduction in Colonial Slavery and Small Acts, as well as many other essays in social texts and the history of the present. Dorothy Roberts is the George A. Weiss University Professor of Law and Sociology at the University of Pennsylvania, with joint appointments in the Departments of Africana Studies and Sociology and the Law School, where she's the inaugural Raymond Pace and Sadie Tainer Mossel Alexander Professor of Civil Rights. She is also the founding director of the Penn Program on Race, Science, and Society. Her major books include Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty. As Science noted in 2023, quote, more than 2 decades after its initial publication, Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body remains an authoritative critique of reproductive inequity in the United States. She's also the author of Shattered Bonds, The Color of Child Welfare, Fatal Invention, How Science, Politics, and Big Business Recreate Race in the 21st Century, and Torn Apart, How the Child Welfare System Destroys Black Families and How Abolition Can Build a Safer World. She's the author of over 100 articles and essays in books and journals, including Race in the 1619 Project. In a review of Fatal Invention, Ann Fausto Sterling writes, quote, Roberts argues passionately and relentlessly. You can picture her making a case to a rapt jury against the idea of race as a biological trait, which she calls, per her title, a fatal invention. Her evidence against biological causes, not biological effects, and her insistence that believing in the biological basis of race is fatal to people of color are compelling. Would you please welcome these excellent transformative scholars? Okay, so to begin, we're going to try to do a roundtable as much as possible. We want this to be organic. We are going to eventually open time for you to be part of this conversation. But the first question for the panel is, what inspired you to pursue an academic career? Which books, articles, or scholars influenced your choice, and why did you pick your specific field? Anyone?
So I'll start
Thank
since
you.
we're in the
Thank
order.
you.
And I will just say, for probably most of the questions, I'm going to try to be very disciplined and give a kind of bullet point version of the response, because each of us could probably go on and on about any of the questions. And then if any of the threads interest you, you can pick them up in the Q&A and ask us to dive deeper.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that out there, so y'all kind of give me the stink eye if I start going a little longer than planned. So the first question I heard was what inspired us to pursue an academic career. So I was an undergrad at Spelman, and I was in a program similar to Mellon, but it was specific to Spelman. Now Spelman has a Mellon program, but at the time it was kind of like a program where you got to work on a thesis, a senior thesis. Not all the students were doing that, and it was even at the lead up to that, I was realizing how much I was craving not just answering questions, which is how we think about what students do, but asking questions. That is not just consuming what other people have written, although that's important, but actually developing my own ideas. And so there was a kind of shift midway through undergrad where I was like craving that second step of asking questions and producing knowledge. And the specific field that I started out with even then was medical sociology, which then sort of built on that in graduate school, science and technology studies. And I think I was drawn to study medicine, science, technology because in many ways these are go unquestioned because they're seen as authoritative forms of knowledge that if you're an outsider, you don't get a say, right? And yet, they impact so many areas of our lives. And so with my kind of stubborn sensibility in both undergrad and grad, I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to question it, so guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna question it, and I'm going to study it. I'm gonna open up what we would call the black box of science and technology to look at the social dimensions and the human dimensions. And so it was that kind of drive to do that. And then in terms of books, articles, scholars that influenced that pathway, she already knows. So I've already embarrassed her on other occasions, but certainly as an undergrad, I remember going to the library, which y'all don't really do anymore. You can download everything, but I went to Clark's library because Spelman's wasn't as sophisticated, and checking out Killing the Black Body was very formative. And later, so that book has stuck with me from the early days, but then when I was transitioning to actually being a professor, before I started my first job, I revisited that book and Dorothy's body of work. And just to give you a sense of what drew me to it, even just the title, Killing the Black Body, is kind of making it plain, right? So it's not this fancy academic title with like a string of words you can't pronounce. It's like, no, we're talking about killing the black body. And to me, that signaled a different orientation to how we can do research and do academia, which is to make it plain. That is, to speak the language that brings more people into the conversation rather than gatekeep and make people feel alienated. And so that's the bullet point version. If you want to pick up any of those threads, you can ask me in Q&A.
Great.
So should we just?
Yes, yeah, that
this
might be
way
easiest,
Rather
yeah.
than alphabetically.
Right.
So thank you, Ruha. I really appreciate that. And as I always say, if my work inspired someone as amazing as Ruha Benjamin, I can retire in peace. I actually, through most of my childhood, wanted to be a professor, largely because my mother was working on her PhD in anthropology when I was born, and she gave it up to take care of me. And so throughout my childhood, she called me my PhD.
Wow.
And she made it very clear
That
that
is
I was
so
to get a PhD and become the professor that she was not able to because she was caring for me. And I was born in the 1950s, so at that time, unusual for women, especially a Black woman, to become a professor. And so throughout college, I majored in anthropology. I planned to be an anthropology professor, but in my senior year, I had no role models. I didn't have a program like the one you went to, Ruha, that told you how you could be an activist and an academic. And I didn't see what I would do with a PhD in anthropology. I didn't just want to teach in the way, and I say just because that's what I thought, that it would keep me in the ivory tower and I wouldn't be engaging with people who were working on social justice issues. And so I decided to go to law school, and I got a JD. I practiced law for a while, and to make a long story short, in the late 1980s, while I was practicing law, I began to read about women who were being prosecuted and incarcerated for being pregnant and using drugs. And I did some research, found that most of these women were Black women. I was outraged by what was going on to Black women. I saw it as they're being punished for having children, and I saw it as connected to a long history of devaluing Black women's childbearing, attempts to control their childbearing, as Jennifer has elucidated so well in her work. And I also found that it required a revisioning of the very meaning of reproductive freedom. At the time, reproductive freedom meant only the legal right to abortion for most people, and including for most reproductive rights organizations. And I thought, this is going to take more than a legal strategy. This is going to take research and a book that explains how racism and sexism are completely entangled in these prosecutions, and how this is related to this long legacy, beginning with the institution of slavery, of attempts to control Black women's reproduction. And so I thought I went back to the original idea. I need to be a professor. I want to do research and writing and teaching, and I realized that I could work with activists. I could be an activist myself and be an academic. And so in 1988, I just applied to law schools. I didn't know how to do it. I want to be a professor, and fortunately, Rutgers in Newark, which is a very progressive law school, made me a professor there. So the reason why, I think I've explained partly why I was so compelled to go into that field. I thought that the way in which reproductive policies have subordinated Black women was essential to understanding white supremacy and patriarchy in America. And also the devaluation of Black women's reproduction signals the way in which people are valued in society. I think that policies related to reproduction are the most telling evidence of how human beings are valued in a society. And I've just found it a very compelling field to work in. I would say the book that was most inspiring to me at the time was Angela Davis's Women, Race, and Class. It still is an inspiration to me. The way in which she explains how racism, white supremacy, sexism, and classism are all entangled. She had this explanation of intersectionality before it became a household word. And she also focused on the issues that were compelling to me: reproduction, child welfare, child care, sexuality and sexual assault, all housework. It was very, very compelling. And that book was published in 1981. Just a very prescient book, and just an early example of the contribution that Angela Davis has made to Black studies since that time and continuing to this day.
So there's an interesting intersection with Dorothy and her work here. So I was an undergraduate at Oberlin College, and I was completely not interested in history at all. I was interested in current issues and was compelled by, I was in college at a time when the Kitchen Table Press was, there was a lot of work being published by and about Black feminist writers. So I was engaged by that. And I was so lucky to be a student of Adrienne Lash Jones, who was the first Black woman to be tenured at Oberlin College in 1984 or something, like way too late. And she taught a course called Black Women in America. And so I took the course, even though it was in the history department, because I wanted to, be in a classroom where I could read the work of Black women writers. So the next semester, Adrienne taught a smaller class on research and writing Black women's history, and she brought us to the Cleveland Historical Society, and I held a journal written by an African-American woman in the late 19th century, and it was like an electric current, like the fact that that I held something, right, that was written by a Black woman so long ago, right? Which by like the 1890s felt very long ago to me, which it doesn't anymore. So Adrienne was incredibly important in terms of making it clear to me that history was interesting and something that she kind of taught me to think about as embodied. I spent 2 years working as a community organizer for ACORN in Boston after I graduated, and then I applied to do history at Duke University, and where I was completely going to do 20th century US history to talk about Black women and social movements. And I got sucked into the history of slavery. And the reason was because I was looking for origins. I wanted to understand something foundational, and I still have that desire for like an originary moment that helps me to understand the process by which Black women's reproductive capacity and Black women's lives as mothers, as carers, as nurturers has got so distorted. So for me, as I was doing the research that became Laboring Women, I was thinking a lot about ideology, and that also came from Deborah Gray White's book, Aren't I a Woman, which was published in 1985, 86, and was, because the first chapters of that book are about ideology, about the image of the Jezebel and the Mammy, and the way that those images are not just stereotype, but that have weight, right? And that became a really important text for me as I was moving further into, back in time into the colonial period, to think about the questions that I then encountered in Killing the Black Body, about how we can use women's experience of reproduction, but also the way that reproduction gets defined by slave owners as an entry point into understanding the monstrosity that is hereditary racial slavery, the ways in which that gets normalized into something that's like technology, right? And so for a long time, I've talked about race as technology, right? Because it changes something. And that feels to me like the thread that connects all three of our work. It's like, what is it that the ideology of race does that is materially lived in and on the body? And so that's, did I answer all the pieces?
You answered all of the pieces.
All right.
Absolutely. So the way that the questions are set up is that I've asked them to talk about how they decided to become academics. The next question is about what their reaction was when they found out that they were awarded a MacArthur Fellowship. But I'm also hearing stuff about race and the constructions of race and how that works. So We will get to the, the other stuff, but I also just want to sort of walk through the biographical stuff a little bit before we do that. So just what was your reaction when you found out you won the MacArthur, when you were awarded a MacArthur Fellowship? I'm sorry. What significance does being MacArthur hold for you personally, and what are your intentions or plans as a recipient of this fellowship?
Should we go the other way now?
Yeah,
let's do
sure,
I'll take
whatever.
you out of the hot
Yes,
seat.
thank you.
So aside from the astonishment and the yelling in the phone, what are you saying to me? What? I said to the lovely person at the MacArthur Foundation who called to tell me this. I think that as this almost year has unfolded, there are two things that have become very, very clear to me. One is that winning a MacArthur Fellowship is an affirmation from your colleagues, because there are an enormous number of people who write for you and who make an argument for why you should have this award. And some people really want you to know that they wrote for you. But
Tell
some
me about
people,
it.
some people keep it
Hasn't happened to
on the QT, you know. But just that sort of swell of good feeling was kind of extraordinary to me, to see like, oh, this is about, and it's about, you know, I'm a historian, I write books really slowly, you know, and to then have the impact that you've made on the field be recognized in this incredibly public way has been really humbling and incredibly gratifying in a very, very, very difficult year. So that's been extraordinary. I have no answer to the question of what my intentions are. I feel like it gives me the opportunity to do the thing that I started to do, which is to try to write a book that's less to other academics and that's more narrative driven, and that's what I'm working on this year. I'd like to be more involved in other kind of public conversations about what the history of slavery means and why I think even now that we need to pay attention to what happened in 1656. It's important. And it's not that the thing that happened then is the same as what's happening now, but the thing that happened then set us on a path, and it is hundreds of years old, and if we don't understand the path, then we're not going to be able to really vision something different. So I think the MacArthur gives me a little bit of confidence that I should try to do that, but I don't know what else.
Guess I'll go next. The main feeling I had when I got the call, again, besides the astonishment and disbelief and all of that and gratitude, was when they read you the statement for why you won the award. And I was actually surprised by it, because most people know my book, Killing the Black Body. I think that's what I'm most known for. And it's pretty well accepted as a book that describes the reality of reproductive oppression and resistance. Of course, not everybody agrees with it, but it's not, I don't think it's considered that controversial anymore. Mind you, it was published in 1997. It was controversial then. I think today, especially after the Dobbs decision, it's hard to deny the harms of reproductive control and the way in which the role that Black women's oppression and resistance have played in it. But that's not what they told me. They said, they talked about my latest work on opposing what I call the family policing system, what is generally known as the child welfare system or child protective services. And that's much more controversial. I call for abolishing this system and replacing it with an approach to supporting families and actually keeping children safe through radical social change and a radical change in the way we think about harms to children. And in addition, understanding the history of white enslavers' control of Black families and attempts to re-enslave Black children through processes that are very similar to what the child welfare system does today. So when they read that, I was just overwhelmed with gratitude that the MacArthur Foundation was recognizing this controversial work that I'm doing that's it's so hard to do. I mean, I'm not doing it by myself. I'm doing it mostly with Black mothers whose children have been taken from them and their fight to get their children back and to make sure it doesn't happen to any other Black mothers. But just recognizing that I had the support of this prestigious fellowship for this controversial work was so important, so gratifying to me. That was the most overwhelming feeling I had, and I'm still very grateful for it. It also means to me the community of other fellows, like these two brilliant people sitting on either side of me. I think I'm allowed to say that we had a gathering as that, like, I won't say anything about what happened there, but, you know, to be honest, I went to the gathering not sure. I knew these two were very nice, wonderful, lovely people, but I wasn't sure some of the people might be a little stuck up, you know? Actually, everyone
Was so
nice, so inviting, so warm. I met so many people.
And so brilliant.
So brilliant, and yet so down to earth. And just as you see the connections between, there were connections among all of us, I thought. And this having that community of wonderful, brilliant people is very special.
Yeah, there's so many things I would just sort of underscore. One is, you know, I had a few friends and colleagues that had won it in previous years. And so I did have this admiration for the fellowship because I admired their work and it was being acknowledged. So there was a sense of like, oh, you know, I get to be part of this cohort of people that are doing work that I admire. So it was really special in that way. Also, you know, very similarly, it feels like an affirmation of taking risks. You know, like all of the work beyond the three of us, like at the retreat, we would hear these short kind of lightning talks in the various fields. We're like pushing boundaries and doing things that were, you know, kind of out of the box in different ways. And so, again, for me, it was a sense of like, oh, the risk that I have taken up to this point, it felt validating. Because you're doing it not knowing, you're doing it for various reasons, you know, the topics you choose, the way we choose to write or engage, not doing the standard way that we're told to do it, and then to be acknowledged in really special way. So that was a part of the reaction. And the last thing, again, related to taking risks, was that I got the call the day after I had a very different kind of call from my university that was investigating me for supporting students for standing up against the genocide. So I had this very tense call the day before, which I recovered from with a little shop therapy. I went to my favorite thrift store to try to kind of wash the icky feeling out. And then I woke up the next morning to this message that says, we have a call for you, and I could see the little signature. And so it just felt like the back-to-back nature of that felt like, again, taking risks. I felt covered. I felt, okay, something has my back, you know? And so the timing was very poined.
Great.
Can I just double on something you said? Because you said at the beginning that you had like a stubbornness in your scholarship, and I think that is also this like that's something that very much resonates for me. It's like I was told again and again that you couldn't write the history of slavery in the colonial, you couldn't write the history of enslaved women in the colonial period. There were no sources, there was nothing to be said, we don't know, we can't know. And I was like, that can't be right. That can't be right. And that tenacity, I think you're right, we saw that again and again. And if you look at some of the other fellows, it's people who were like, I just think I want to really ask this question. I'm really going to keep on asking it. And that tenacity, I think, is really.
There was a theme.
Yeah, when I was working on Killing the Black Body and began to support Black women who were being prosecuted, there were very few people who supported them at all,
absolutely.
including all the major reproductive rights organizations. And I was told repeatedly, you cannot write on that topic. Like you're going to get tenure. You're going to write your first law review article about Black women who smoke crack while
Who
they
were criminals.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and knowing, but no, those are the women we should be concerned about. If the Constitution doesn't apply to them,
Yeah,
it's meaningless.
Yeah.
It's meaningless, yeah.
absolutely.
I want to stay on this point a little bit more about what do you think it means to have won this prize at this time for your respective fields, especially when you're writing books, when people are not thinking about race and technology at the time when you published your first book. They're not thinking about gender and race and slavery. A lot of books are being published at the time when Laboring Women comes out that are completely ignoring and neglecting gender, when people aren't thinking about what are the legal consequences around reproduction, but also the way that you framed it, Professor Roberts, in terms of moving the discussion beyond just the question of abortion. So maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what this recognition means for the state of Black studies.
Yes.
I mean, I think that for specifically for the study of slavery in the context of Black studies, and the students in the room, you know, we're in a moment right now where conversations about what the afterlife of slavery means are they're very full, they're very rich, they're very archivally deep, they're very thoughtful. And I think that part of what's happened right now is there's a recognition about the connections between the past and the present. Not, again, like not a uniformity, but just that we have to tease them out. We have to think carefully. That wonderful phrase of Saidiya Harman's of pushing us to think about the afterlife of slavery that feels so it feels so important, crucial, life-saving, right? And yet, all of us have been awarded this award at a moment when the attacks on higher education are unprecedented. All of us teach in departments that are literally, there are people who want to decimate them, who simply want to close them down. And that is that affirmation of the work at this moment feels unbelievably important to say, no. The history of slavery, the history of race, the ways in which reproductive policy are punitive, we have to pay attention to that. And to do so is exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and it's exactly where the assault is centered and targeted. That's everything we've been talking about, that's exactly what is being attacked by the administration and others that support it. And I think it's testament to how powerful this work is, how real it is, how truthful it is, how important it is, how essential it is in order to undo the afterlives of slavery and the current continuation of white supremacy and other forms of structural inequality. It tells you.
I take the attacks as an affirmation.
Absolutely.
So yes, the MacArthur's not, but the attacks to me underscore the power, the meaning, the significance, because you're not going to spend all this money, time, law, attacking something that is not influential,
Right.
that is not powerful.
Yeah.
So perhaps, we, in a previous, era, might have thought, oh, we're in the academy, it's cloistered, it's insular, that's the real world out there. But these ideas matter. These ideas have so much power in the world, whether we understand their power or not. And so to me, understanding the attacks as a recognition, distorted as it may be. And then I think, to the question of like, so what going forward, do we think about the role of Black studies? You described the scene of you holding this journal from, how hundreds of years ago. And for me, Black studies is about that direction, but it's also about the evidence that we are leaving for future generations. So whether it's in the form of a journal that you write, an article that you write, something that you create in the world that's not just for your peers, right? It's not just for our colleagues, but it's thinking about the significance of what we're doing for generations forward. Someone is going to be holding your journal. Someone is going to be holding your book. And so in many ways, I think one way to understand what we're doing is leaving evidence. We're documenting. So archives of the past, yes, but archives of the present, And so I think that's an important dimension. And I guess the last thing I will say is that within the academy and popular understandings more broadly, the studies fields are routinely disparaged. Black studies, gender studies, queer studies, right? And I think sometimes we can internalize that inferiority complex. Certainly when students are deciding whether to major, they have to have that very tense conversation with their parents and family members, and they always have to answer, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? And I think really pushing back against that sort of relegation that this is some marginal niche thing. My understanding of Black studies, it's a lens, it's a way of thinking and reading our social reality that is routinely more accurate, precise, embracing. It is, and in my view, it can be applied to every area of our life. So it's about a group of people and a particular history, but the way that my own entry point into it is that I'm applying Black studies to our understanding of technology, to science, to medicine. You can apply it to anything. And so part of it is to have a much more expansive understanding of what we can do with this. And in fact, that is what makes it so dangerous.
Exactly.
That is why they understand it's not a niche thing. It's something that's questioning everything, the very foundation of modernity, right? And everything else that we associate with that. And so I feel moving forward, like just stepping into that power of this tradition that we have, but not just that, to really understand ourselves as sort of producing what the next generations are going to then be reading, thinking, questioning going forward.
There's also, I remember, I confess to a little naivete when the attacks against the 1619 Project happened. When the attacks, like, oh, it's just Florida and Texas, where they're after, the curriculum in African American history or African American studies in the public schools, but to understand how important it was to erase that story, those stories, that interpretive perspective, because really the 1619 Project is a testament to Black studies. It is embedded in questions that are historically framed, but it's a Black studies project, and that and understanding the danger, and to now be where we are now. And to see what has happened since Nicole Hannah-Jones published, organized that project, is astonishing. The speed and the vitriol with which the work that we and so many of our colleagues do has been deemed irrelevant at best and dangerous we need to pay attention to why it makes people so uncomfortable to say the history of this country is a history embedded in oppressive forces. And we understand that when we see that slavery existed with every single founding moment, every single ship from Europe that arrives to North America, to the Caribbean, to Latin America, includes enslaved African people, everyone. So if we start there and then say, so then,
Exactly.
so how do we recast modernity? And that is a crucial question because it has led us here, right?
I would just add one thing, which is, as you both are talking, I'm thinking about what's unique about Black studies, and it's the accuracy of the foundational events and ideologies of the United States and globally. It's also that it always includes not just an understanding of oppression and subordination and inequality, but resistance against it and
refusal.
victorious continuing resistance against it.
Exactly.
That is the scary part as well, I think.
Exactly.
That it's a hopeful form of study.
Yes.
It's a rebellious form of study. And I think that's what scares those in power.
I mean, just one sort of data point is that all of the undergrads who occupied the building at Princeton that I was being investigated for, all of them were African American studies majors. The grad students were from different fields, but then our building became the problem. It was like, oh, they're coming from that building. What have you been teaching them? And so they can imagine the students coming up with this on their own, through their own study. But so this is an illustration of how it becomes a problem to produce this knowledge, a problem for power.
Yeah.
So there's a lot on the table. I'm really fascinated by this point of, especially for us as historians, thinking about thinking about the future, thinking about scholarship as the primary source for future generations. I think there's a lot on the table about what is the state of Black studies today and what it means and why it matters to publish a book in terms of its efficacy in response to the political climate. But I really am going to just in terms of time, I'm going to open it up to the floor because I'm curious to hear what other people have to say. Otherwise, I'm happy to go back to my written questions. But I think there's a lot of different ideas that each of these speakers has presented to us. So Grace in the back has microphone, so please just raise your hand and we'll go from here. So there's some here.
Up here.
Yeah.
And up
Up
here,
in the
all
front,
over,
yeah.
up there too. And,
Yes. And if you could just stand up and introduce yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I'm going first?
Okay.
Oh, gosh. Okay, I have two questions. One is the rise of generative AI, and I'm wondering, in the current sort of our political climate, the economy of runaway economic inequality, what are your thoughts on whether or not generative AI is a good or bad thing? And I say this having just come from a nonprofit leadership institute where one of the speakers encouraged all of us to embrace and use generative AI, not generative AI, but just AI technology. And reading an article that I think Ohio State is mandating that all classes use or integrate AI technology into their classrooms. So that's one question. And then the other is a thought that came to mind as you were talking, is how is it possible for folks to come through these institutions not understanding the importance of disciplines like Black studies, right? And I say that thinking about my experience as an undergrad being part of a group of Black students, Black campus activists that fought to establish institutions that better support Black students, and we organized a sit-in. We had a list of demands, one of which was a mandatory course on the history of racism. The other was a Africana Research Institute, the establishment of that. We got the institute, but they did not do the mandatory course in the history of racism. So it's not lost to me that people can go through the academy and really not learn anything about women's studies, Black studies, et cetera.
Those are two big questions.
You're the
take
expert
the
on
AI.
technology, so
I'm
we're all
thinking
like,
about how do I take a 1 hour talk
I know,
and
exactly.
turn it into a 1 minute response.
You can have 3 minutes, 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. I do not think we should be mandating or championing generative AI as institutions or et cetera. So I think part of it is to distinguish the benefit that individuals gain in many contexts from using this, the speed at which you can generate literally all kinds of text, images, videos, et cetera, and discern the experience of individuals, the benefit of individuals, and understand its relationship to an entire ecosystem in which these tools are being developed. So when we analyze a specific technology, we can't say, is it good or bad, should we use it or not, without reframing the question again to what are the social dimensions of the production of this and then who it's impacting. I'll just give 2 quick examples of what I mean by that ecosystem. So you as an individual typing in a prompt, generating some kind of response, relies on huge labor costs, people behind the screen that are helping to produce the ease and efficiency of this. What we would call ghost work, armies of laborers, many in different countries, that are making things appear magical on our side, right? So part of it is to make visible that human dimension, the labor, stories that are erased from how we describe why these two are important. The other huge dimension of the ecosystem is literally the ecological costs of this. Right now, you might be following the battle happening in Memphis, Tennessee, because Musk built a supercomputer called Colossus. And not surprising, it's located near a Black community that's now experiencing all of the environmental injustice offshoots of these generators, helping to power. So us typing in a little thing relies on all of these data centers around the world, and more battles are happening in communities where very tangibly people's energy bills are going up, water bills are going up because of the suck of these things. So again, distinguishing what you might gain as an individual from what does that rely on? What does it rest on? Another way to think about it is like the dream of generative AI relies on nightmares of many kinds that often get erased. And so that has to be part of the conversation, the analysis, the policy moving forward when we think about whether to adopt or adapt them.
If I could add yet another dimension to what Ruha is talking about when, she says there's more to it than just the individual prompting the computer to give them a speedy answer. Another aspect of it is what the AI is being used to support. In who is determining what this technology is going to make more efficient. If the technology is being used by an oppressive system, it is making this oppressive system more efficient. In Killing the Black Body, I had a section where I said access or excess, and made the point that having access to technologies isn't in and of itself good if the purpose of the technology and the people who are determining its inputs and its uses are doing it for an oppressive end. In the field I've been working in, for example, family policing, more and more child welfare departments are using AI to identify the families that are at risk of maltreating their children. Well, the databases they're using include variables that only target impoverished people. They leave out, wealthy white families altogether, because they're based on data that comes from social service programs. And the variables they're using as who's at risk are variables that identify Black people, very likely disproportionately identify Black people. Like, do you have a a criminal record? Are you a single parent? What neighborhood do you live in? Do you live in an at-risk neighborhood? So yes, AI is making it more efficient to target families, to investigate them, but which families are being investigated? And what's the whole purpose of the investigation? You know, it's to blame a family for the struggles that the main thing that happens, for the struggles they're enduring to take care of their children because of social inequity. So all of these questions, including, all these important questions Ruha just talked about, of whose nightmares are going into the very production of it, but then what's the use? Whose hands are these technologies in? And so often we think about it, redistribution is important. There's a lot of things that should be distributed, but that's not the only question. Also, we also have to think about these, I think, even deeper questions of what access means. And sometimes people are included in an oppressive system. It's not just about excluding people from these technologies. Many people are being included into them in order to more efficiently target them for repression.
Yeah, maybe we can skip this.
I think that there's this,
Okay, yeah.
if you look at the history of, I'm not talking about technology, by the way, I'm moving on to the second one.
Yes, okay.
I have nothing to say.
Please,
Nothing.
yeah, no, we didn't answer the
I'm just
second
trying to learn.
question.
I think that if you look at the history of Black studies and other studies programs, like I was thinking, Ruha, about your point about the way that interdisciplinary spaces on campuses have become, people are shying away from them. There's a really interesting arc, which is they come out of student insurgency.
Yes, exactly.
The entire range of those disciplines comes only out of student protest.
Yes.
That's where they come from. Then they move and into a new space, which is sometimes like identitarian, you know, but also those places of Black studies are demanding changes in the larger curriculum. They're demanding changes to the sociology department and the econ department and the history department and the English department. And in some instances, those changes have happened. So you take an Intro to American Literature course, you're gonna read Toni Morrison. You know, you take a US history course, you're going to learn about the history of slavery. But there's also something lost, and part of what's lost is it feels like it's only about institutional politics, right? Why is the Black Studies department only got 3 tenured faculty members and the history department has 27? That, you know, it's like, is that really the thing we need to fight about? Well, maybe we need to fight about or fight through a re-articulation and energizing of what these interdisciplinary spaces do. And they teach students how to think critically.
Exactly.
That's what they do. And they teach students how to be insurgent. And that's the part that's dangerous. That's why those students come from that building, right? That's why there's an association with a kind of interdisciplinarity and a certain and the potential anyway for radical refusal. Sometimes that gets washed out, right? But I think we need to. It's not just institutional politics. It's not just about like the space of higher ed. It's that students have historically been at the forefront of social change, and it happens inside the institution, but then it happens in the streets, and that's dangerous. And so you get, you know, oh, you're just privileged students who like, you know, are demonstrating and then, you know, going to the dining hall or whatever. Like we've all heard that kind of dismissal of student radicalism, but it's actually something we have to pay attention to.
Okay, great, thank you. Faith? Okay.
Actually, this gentleman has the next question, then we
and
can
then
do
Faith.
Faith, and then
Hi, I just wanted to bring it fast forward to 2025. You lovely ladies are basically historians. In 25 years, what is going to be the impression of the current African-American woman statue that's in Times Square? I'm sure you're familiar with it. What will be, 25 years from now, what will be the historical impression of that statue?
Do you mean what will people think 25 years from now about that moment? Or do you mean what would be the new statue in 25 years?
What will be their impression of that statue 25 years ago?
25 years from now.
I mean, I think we're living at this moment where so much of the history of who we are is being contested, right? I mean, I don't know how to answer the question because to be frank, I'm afraid that there will be, that on a sort of official level, that there will be no recollection, but I'm sure there will be another space of recollection. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, so Faith, then here, then here. Okay, go ahead, Faith.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm wondering, when you go about writing a piece, whether that be a book or an article, and it's on this oppressive history that always builds on itself, how do you handle timelines? How do you know when to focus on an era or when to focus on a decade? And how do you handle how much background to include when you're writing these things?
It's a historian's question.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just a historian's question, because like, I can say, well, I'm writing about, like right now, I'm writing I'm writing about Black women who are enslaved in North America in the 17th century. That's how I've bracketed it, right? I'm organizing it around the life of a particular woman, Elizabeth Key. So it's actually easy. I think that when you're writing about contemporary questions, that issue of like, how far back, like how do you deal with timeline? I think historians have it easy. It's like
They
this
can
decade,
pick, yeah.
you
And
know?
You put it in the title, the
Exactly.
years that you're like.
1971 to 1983, boom, you're done.
Yeah, I don't think in terms of timeline. So that's why I meant it's a historian's question in the way it was framed, because I don't approach the writing in terms of timelines. I realized recently that I'm often writing the way that I teach, which is trying to link different types of concepts and interventions to examples, and I'm trying to keep my students' attention. I don't want them to fall asleep. So I'm often writing in a way that is not going into too much depth because I want you to get to the end. And I often use the footnotes for the people who want to do the deeper dives into any particular point that I'm making. Like if you want to nerd out on this, go to the back, right? And so the actual book is often more fast-paced and kind of like, look at this, stay awake, look at this, see, hi, whoa. And so it's kind of a little schizophrenic in that way, and I just accepted it. But that was one of the things I had in mind when I said sort of taking risks. It's not it's not written in a traditional sort of cohesive way that you might expect an academic book to be, in part because I have my students in mind, and then I also am writing books as tools for communities to do things with. So the book is the beginning of something, not the end of some process that I've gone through. It's to spark something out in the world. And so I need it to be a spark rather than something that's like kind of very sort of calm and, you know. And so that's kind of what I also had in mind when I said, you might not want to do that before you have tenure.
Great.
Yeah, I probably have violated what historians would think is proper, because I now that I think about it, my books do have chapters that say, here's where it all started, here's the origin of slavery. I think every single book I've written has a chapter about slavery, and I want to trace back the policies that exist today to ideologies and practices and ways of thinking that developed during the institution of slavery. And you know, I just pick stories that resonate and that show, you know, as Jennifer was saying, it's not that they're exactly the same, but you could see ways of thinking that have not changed.
Yes.
And I find that very compelling. It's something that I've used in trying to show people that policies that seem benevolent even today, like the child welfare system, when you compare them to similar policies that were imposed on enslaved people, and you can see the similarities, the parallels, again, not exactly the same. It's a way of opening up people's eyes. I've used it in everything I've talked about, racism in medicine. I point out that some of the ideas about race-based medicine and the racial concept of disease were developed during the time of slavery to justify enslaving Black people. The idea that our bodies operate differently. Some of the very same ideas that Black people have lower lung capacity, that Samuel Cartwright developed in the 1850s, are now still taught in medical classes today. And that's something that's very compelling. Or as I said, when you compare what happens in most courts and cities today where Black mothers are there pleading to get their children back from judges who've deemed them neglectful because they didn't have enough space in their apartment or because they had to go to work and leave a child at home. They had no choice, or they don't have enough food. It's parallels so much the apprenticeship system right after emancipation, where judges said Black parents were neglectful and sent the children back to former enslavers to work for them. And I find it a compelling way of getting people to at least think, well, maybe these policies that we think are so wonderful today, and, they have not only have roots, but they have this resemblance to practices during slavery. So that's how I've used it. And
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, picking up on what Dorothy said, one piece of advice I would give about writing is that if it resonates with you, if it gives you energy, that is contagious on the page. If you're putting yourself to sleep, if you feel like it's grueling, then you're gonna put, so part of it is to tap into what enlivens you. And that translates, and try to convey that, right, on the page. And I think that's a good kind of rule of thumb.
right, follow your passion.
Yes.
We have a question over here. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yes, go.
And then I'm afraid we're gonna have to stop
Oh,
after
wow.
Jevin's question.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Yes.
First, I have a question for Professor Roberts. I want to know how your mom felt about you going to law school instead of getting your PhD.
Well, my parents, you're saying how my mom felt about it?
You said your mom wanted you
Yeah,
to.
exactly. She was just very happy that I got an advanced degree, and they accepted it. I have to say, now as a Penn Integrates Knowledge professor, I'm appointed as a full faculty member in sociology and Africana studies, even though, this is a secret, I don't have a PhD in sociology or Africana studies. They've accepted, and my parents both passed away before I got that position at Penn. I think they would have been really proud of me and happy.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Thanks for that
And
question.
I just real quick for Professor Morgan, I wanted to know, you mentioned how Florida, they talked about how Florida was like the only real state that was dismantling the African American studies programs. And I remember a very particular news program I watched where one of the dudes who was a member of the committee, he was a Black man, and he was like, DeSantis was like, oh, look, we have Black people on our committee. But then he in front of the camera, he goes, there's no reason that queer history should be a part of Black history. And so I felt like that's sort of rooted in it's almost like obviously misogyny, right? And I just want to know, as a man who identifies as both a feminist and a man, I want to know how can I be more conscious of being feminist in my work and not sort of ignoring the fact that obviously queer history is a huge part of James Baldwin. You just can't ignore it. I just want to know what you think about, and all of you, but I just want to know what you.
And I know we're pressed for time, so I'll try to be quick, and you all should please come and talk to us after we're done. But I would just say that I think that I said a really quick thing about sort of the way that Black studies or any ethnic studies programs and queer studies and women's studies sometimes gets associated with a kind of identitarianism, right? And that can be a wonderful thing, and it can be a limiting thing. It's because it's my experience becomes the guiding force. So for this man, he had a particular frame for what Black studies was, and it was heteronormative and it was masculine, and that's not what Black studies is, right? It is a critical intersectional set of practices and ideologies and methodologies that refuse to kind of stay put, like it's not static, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that, again, it's not just a question for nerding out. It's a question for where does power lie? And if we're attentive to the ways in which power is being distorted and being mobilized, sometimes inside our own communities, then we can do the work of pushing back again, of refusing that kind of monolithic notion of what Black Studies is to that person. But I think it's a moving target.
Okay. Well, I want to thank our speakers so much for being here tonight. I know that it feels like we just got started. But I want to say that for some of you, you know their work and you've been familiar with it, and so this was an opportunity for you to see them in conversation. For others of you, this is the first time you have heard of them, so even though this is just the beginning, we have their books available for sale so that you can continue to learn more about them. So I hope that this program provided you with an introduction to their ideas and to their thoughts and into their intellectual world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.